All right, we'll go ahead and get started this evening. It's about a minute early, but we can make use of that time tonight since we've got two chapters to go through. Um, the way we've got chapter 2 that we're going to cover tonight and chapter 3. And Larson and I talked, and kind of the way we're going to handle this tonight is I'm going to kind of lead us through chapter 2. Is my microphone working? Does it sound like it's on? I'm going to kind of lead us through chapter 2 and let Larson kind of jump in and make points when he needs to. And then we're going to kind of reverse roles, and he's going to lead us through chapter 3 and so on. See, there was one other thing that I was going to say as far as class tonight, but I can't remember what that was. So in way of review, what Bible period are we in? Captivity. And captivity can be divided into how many different invasions were there to take people into captivity? 3. And does anybody remember those years? When was the first one? 605. And the second one? 597. And the third one? Anybody know the third one? 588 would be, I think, the third one. So which one was Daniel and his friends carried into captivity? Which captivity were they carried in? The 605, the first period. That's correct. And during this time, Nebuchadnezzar, he took Daniel and his friends along with other young men from Judah, and he carried them away to Babylon. And basically what he did was he put them in this training program, a program where they were supposed to be trained to be advisors, kind of counselors to the king, which he already had a lot of them. Babylon would have been, during this period in time, they would have been far and above, beyond other empires of their time as far as technology goes and things like astronomy and things like that. They were very much advanced in those ways. And the king had men that were educated in those type of things to be kind of his cabinet or his advisors during times when he needed help. Well, these young men were taken and they are in this training program to be some of those advisors. And they're going to be in this program for how many years? 3. They're supposed to be in it for 3 years, and then they're going to sort of graduate, so to speak, and be brought before the king. Last time we talked, the first story we talked about was that the king had appointed these special foods that was to be given to these young men that were above and beyond the food that the rest of the people there would have eaten, in order to, I guess, make them healthier, maybe healthier men, give them the sustenance that they needed to be what he wanted them to be, basically. And that we saw that Daniel refused this food because it was what? It was unclean, or it was defiled, and he did not want to defile himself by partaking of this. So what did he ask for? Vegetables and water. For how many days? 10. That's what they had for 10 days, and then they were supposed to be brought before the king. And I'm just kind of paraphrasing all of this, but they were to be brought before the king at the end of this. And when they were brought before the king, what was found out? They weren't scrawny, were they? They were much healthier and beyond what the rest of the young men were. So, what was the point of all that? The point is, God is at work. And his plan is going to be carried out even when his people are in a faraway land, in bondage, and regardless of if they're old or if they're young. God is at work here, and he rules in the kingdoms of men. Do you have anything else as far as review goes?
No, sir. That was great.
Any of y'all have any questions or comments on what we talked about last time before we get into chapter 2? All right. I'm going to kind of summarize the majority of the first part of the chapter, and we're really not going to get into a lot of reading until we get down to about verse 19 or so. But I don't want to rush things, okay? If there's a point that one of y'all, that somebody wants to make or want to stop, please, we'll take all the time that we need as far as that goes. So we'll come back and talk about anything you want to talk about as far as chapter 2 goes. And Larson, you can jump in with any points you want to make as we go through this as well. So we're in the second year now of King Nebuchadnezzar. So what does that tell us as far as Daniel goes? What is he still doing? He's still in training, okay, because he's supposed to be in training for 3 years, and we're only in the second year of Nebuchadnezzar. Now, Nebuchadnezzar begins to have these dreams, and it doesn't seem like they're just any dreams. The way I kind of understand it and take it is he's had dreams before, but they're not dreams like he has now. And they so greatly trouble him that he's losing sleep over them. And you can tell by reading through chapter 2 that they just leave him very disturbed. So he calls his advisors that normally help him in matters such as this. And usually when he calls his advisors to interpret something, how do they do it? In order to interpret that, what do they usually do? Yes, they know the dream first. That way, they can make the pieces of the puzzle fit together, and because they really don't know how to interpret, they don't have the power to really interpret the dream, right? So they need to know the dream first, and then they can make it fit to whatever they want to say about it. So he calls his advisors, and that's what they want to do. But as we go through this, we're going to see that Nebuchadnezzar is going to handle this dream much differently. I want you to look. Somebody read for me what Nebuchadnezzar says here in chapter 2, verse 5. Somebody read verse 5, please.
My decision is firm. If you do not make known the dream to me and its interpretation, you shall be cut in pieces, and your houses shall be made in ash heap.
Okay, so not only does he want them to tell him the interpretation, he wants them to tell him what the dream was, right? Now that's a lot different than what they've been doing. And what's going to happen if they can't do this? They're going to be killed. He's going to cut them to pieces. And it's kind of interesting as we go through here and talk about Nebuchadnezzar. And he certainly wasn't the only king that was like this, but kings back then, that's normally the way they handled things, right? They didn't say, well, we'll put you in prison for a little while, then we'll let you out. If you didn't do what they told you to do, you were going to be killed in some brutal fashion, it seems like. So if they weren't able to tell him this dream and the interpretation, well, he was going to cut them into pieces. And that's how they would die. You have anything so far?
Just that this is interesting. So when I read this, I immediately think of the story of Joseph, young man, away from home, still trying to be faithful. And then the added element here, I think Pharaoh kind of did the same thing, but he was revealing that, and we've kind of amped it up now to where there's no revealing. So if you see that, you see the comparison between Joseph and Daniel, but maybe we would say this is an even more intense situation. Really, Daniel hadn't found himself into the story yet, but just the demand that's being made here is interesting.
So whatever it is about this dream it's troubling Nebuchadnezzar to the point that he wants to know, he wants to make sure that this interpretation is true, or he wants to make sure that he knows the truth. He wants to make sure that his advisors are not able to just fill him full of lies or just, whatever they make up. This dream is different, and he wants to know what the truth is about it, and he wants it interpreted correctly for sure. So when they continue to refuse, and it's not really that they refused, they didn't know how to interpret a dream. They didn't have that power. He demands all the wise men to be killed. Now, who's this going to include? It's going to include Daniel and Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. That's right. It's going to include all of them. So the king sends Arioch, who was one of his captains, to come to Daniel. And he asked why, Daniel asked, why is this so urgent? It's kind of like he's wanting to know what's going on. So he tells him. And Daniel, being Daniel, says, take me to the king. I'll do it. Now, what does Daniel have that would make him say such a thing? He knows that God is at work. That's the point me and Larson have been making since we started this. He knows that God's behind it all. And he's got 100% full faith that God's going to take care of it. And not even knowing. That's interesting to me. He doesn't even know yet what the dream is or its interpretation. But he still has the confidence and the faith in God to say, take me to him, I'll tell him. All right? So, he leaves and he goes back to the house, and Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego is there. And what does Daniel say? Let's start doing. Praying. He says to pray that God will reveal this dream to him and that he will spare their lives. So that's what they did, and that very night, what happened? As he slept, Daniel. That's right. God revealed the dream to him. And when Daniel woke up, Daniel prayed a prayer of thanksgiving to God. And I think it would, if you think we have time, it may be good to read that. You want to read that prayer?
Sure. Yeah, so let's pick up in verse 19. Then the mystery was revealed to David in a vision of the night. Then Daniel blessed the God of heaven. Daniel answered and said, blessed be the name of God forever and ever, to whom belong wisdom and might. He changes time and seasons. He removes kings and sets up kings. He gives wisdom to the wise and knowledge to those who have understanding. He reveals deep and hidden things. He knows what is in the darkness, and the light dwells with him. To you, O God of my fathers, I give thanks and praise, for you have given me wisdom and might, and have now made known to me what we asked of you, for you have made known to us the king's matter.
All right. So I can't stress enough how beautiful it is the way Daniel handles himself in all of these situations, and how we need to draw application as well when we face situations like this, and have decisions that we need to make. We need to try to be like Daniel and have the Daniel type faith in God. And then when God comes through, it wasn't just like, well, let's just go on with it. Daniel offers this prayer of thanks and praises God for what he had done. You can see the deep relationship that's there in that. Anybody have anything up to this point?
I think that I relate to that. Well, I don't relate to that. Maybe I'll just say it this way. How many times I've asked God for something, he's given it to me, maybe more than enough, and then I forget to tell him thank you, And so I want to be more like this.
Yeah, exactly. Anybody else?
Just thinking about his prayer, the magicians, enchanters, astrologers, Chaldean, the people from the Babylonian wise men are in the dark. And what's the emphasis on where God is in all of this? He's in the light, right? So they are in darkness. Now, I'm sure that they say that they are leaning on the gods of, in fact, I think they mentioned that back up in verse 11. The thing the kings ask is difficult, and no one can show it to the king except the gods whose dwelling is not with flesh. There is a sense in which that's right. It would have to be something beyond human capacity to be able to do this. But Daniel has a connection with the true God, and they don't. And so you see him giving thanks. The blessing, I like this in verse 23, to you, O God of my fathers, which connects us to like Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. The God of Israel is the one who has the power to do this, not the gods of Babylon, which may have been a question captives were wondering about. Which God has the most power? Well, we're going to see that in the dream interpretation here.
And that was another point that I wanted to make as I was introducing this that I forgot to mention. When Daniel refused the food and they were found to be much more favorable, it says that God was pleased. And what did God give Daniel and his friends? Wisdom and knowledge in all things, it says, including the ability to interpret visions and dreams. And that's important because as we go into this section right here. So, verse 25, I want everybody to look at verse 25 with me. I'm going to read through 28. It says, so Daniel has been brought before, he's going to be brought before the king. It says, then Arioch quickly brought Daniel before the king and said thus to him, I have found a man of the captives of Judah who will make known to the king the interpretation. Now you can kind of sense a sigh of relief there in Arioch, I think, because Arioch was probably the man that was going to have to carry out this execution. So when Arioch finds out that Daniel wants to go before the king, it seems like he's excited for him to go there. And he brings him there and he says, I found a man of the captives of Judah who will make known to the king the interpretation. The king answered and said to Daniel, whose name was Belteshazzar, are you able to make known to me the dream which I have seen and its interpretation? Daniel answered in the presence of the king and said, the secret which the king has demanded, the wise men, the astrologers, the magicians, and the soothsayers cannot declare to the king. But there's a God in heaven who reveals secrets, and he has made known to King Nebuchadnezzar what will be in the latter days. Your dream and the visions of your head upon your bed were these. And we're not going to get into those just yet, but so as Daniel is talking to the king, he tells him, look, no man can do what you're asking to be done here. It's impossible. But there is a God that can. And through Daniel, God is going to reveal this dream to Nebuchadnezzar. And basically what Daniel tells him, he says, what God is trying to show you, Nebuchadnezzar, is he's trying to show you what's going to happen when? In the future, in the latter days. What's the latter days? When we talk about the latter days, what are we normally talking about? The end of the time period, you said? Okay. Yes, what we're talking about here would be during the gospel age, during God's last period of time before before Jesus comes back and it's all over. Okay, so what we're talking about is the days of Christ, the gospel age would be the latter days. He's going to show what's going to happen in the latter days. That's what God's trying to tell him. Verse 29, as for you, O king, thoughts came to your mind while on your bed about what would come to pass after this, and he who reveals secrets has made known to you what will be. But as for me, this secret has not been revealed to me because I have more wisdom than anyone living, but for our sakes who make known the interpretation to the king, and that you may know the thoughts of your heart. So basically what Daniel says is there's a twofold reason that you have seen this. Number one, he has shown me this interpretation so that we don't have to die, right? He's shown me this. He's shown that to Daniel so Daniel and the other wise men that the king has sent the decree out on don't have to be killed. And the other reason is so that Nebuchadnezzar will know what's bothering him, what God has shown him. Okay? Do you have anything as far as that?
No, I think that's great. Yeah.
All right.
I will say this. When Daniel's first word to, are you able to make known the dream to me that I've seen its interpretation, his first word is no. I imagine that was like, wait, what? But then you got verse 28, but there is a God. So it's interesting how Daniel seems to downplay himself in all of this. And I think that goes with what Miss Amanda was saying a minute ago about the giving of thanks there. There are ways in which Daniel is going to be blessed, has been blessed, and yet he gives thanks and he puts himself way down the list as far as why he's able to do this. He even says, it's not because I'm wiser than all the living, verse 30. That's not why he's been able to interpret this. Rather, it has been a blessing that's been given from God, and so he recognizes that even in the way that he approaches this answer.
Yeah, and in comparison, if you had the answer, yes, I know exactly what you're with.
Especially when your life is on the line. But yes, I can tell you. It's like Daniel has enough clarity of thought here to say, no, nobody can tell you but God. And so, yeah. Yes, Mr. Gerald.
This area has a lot of confidence in Daniel, the way he brings him before the king here. Because if this thing crashes and burns, I don't know that he's not held
You're right.
responsible as well. Not just Daniel.
Yeah. As I was preparing for this, I usually go back and listen to when it's been taught before. A lot of us probably do that, but I know Lonnie made that point as well. He talked about there was a lot of confidence in this passage. Not only what you're talking about, Daniel had confidence in God, and it seems that Arioch had a lot of confidence in Daniel. So yes. Anything else? All right, I'm going to read 31 through 35, and then we'll go back and kind of summarize that. 31, you, O king, were watching. So Daniel's starting to tell him what his dream was. Behold, a great image. This great image, whose splendor was excellent, stood before you, and its form was awesome. This image's head was of fine gold, its chest and arms of silver, its belly and thighs of bronze, its legs of iron, its feet partly of iron and partly of clay. You watched while a stone was cut out without hands, which struck the image on its feet of iron and clay and broke them in pieces. Then the iron, the clay, the bronze, the silver, and the gold were crushed together and became like chaff from the summer threshing floors. The wind carried them away so that no trace of them was found, and the stone that struck the image became a great mountain and filled the whole earth. This is the dream. Now we will tell the interpretation of it before the king. So, imagine being Nebuchadnezzar here, and you've had this dream, and this, it's so vivid. And Daniel begins to tell this to you. You saw a great image. That's exactly what I saw. And Daniel continues on, and it just gets more and more vivid. And imagine how Nebuchadnezzar's thinking there. The confidence just would have to kind of build in Daniel as Daniel goes on and tells Nebuchadnezzar exactly what he saw. And again, God is working. It's just amazing how God has put Daniel right where he needs him to be at this point in time. so he could reveal himself to Nebuchadnezzar. All right, this 37. You, O king, are a king of kings. This is the interpretation of the dream. You are the king of kings, for the God of heaven has given you a kingdom, power, strength, and glory. And wherever the children of men dwell, or the beasts of the field and the birds of the heaven, he has given them into your hand and has made you ruler over them all. You and your empire are this head of gold. So that's the Babylonian Empire, the head of gold. 39, but after you shall arise another kingdom, inferior to yours, then another, a third kingdom of bronze, which shall rule over all the earth. And the fourth kingdom shall be as strong as iron, inasmuch as iron breaks in pieces and shatters everything, and like iron that crushes, that kingdom will break in pieces and crush all the others. Whereas you saw the feet and toes, partly of potter's clay, partly of potter's clay and partly of iron, the kingdom shall be divided, yet the strength of the iron shall be in it, just as you saw the iron mixed with ceramic clay. And as the toes of the feet were partly of iron and partly of clay, so the kingdom shall be partly strong and partly fragile. As you saw iron mixed with ceramic clay, they will mingle with the seed of men, but they will not adhere to one another, just as iron does not mix with clay. And in the days of these kings, the God of heaven will set up a kingdom which shall never be destroyed, and the kingdom shall not be left to other people. It shall break in pieces and consume all these kingdoms, and it shall stand forever. I'm going to stop right there at 44 and kind of go back and talk about this a little bit. So the head of gold was Babylon, and I wish I had somebody sitting here beside me that knew history. But the head of gold was the Babylonian Empire. The next one, the chest and arms of silver, Medo-Persian Empire. That is correct. And the belly and thighs of bronze, the Greek Empire under who? Alexander the Great. And then the fourth kingdom was the legs of iron, Rome. That is correct. And now, Larson, this might be where you may correct me here, but as this was something that I really didn't understand until I started teaching history, and I think this is what it's talking about. But at the end of the Roman Empire, when the Roman Empire fell, does anybody know what happened? Melissa, you're not allowed to answer this question because me and you have done talked about this. Does anybody know what happened to the Roman Empire before it fell? It was divided. That is right. It split into basically two halves and really weakened the empire to the point where it crumbled. And I think that's what the toes and feet of the clay and iron are talking about. Am I right about that?
I think that very well could be right. If you read the commentaries, there's lots of different understandings of all of this, and I think it is hard maybe to figure out exactly the details. But you can see up here that was I got it right. I'm glad that Mr. Colby went through it, and I had it exactly like he did. I would have this question about the iron mixed with the clay. The only thing that I would think about is that in verse 44, in the days of those kings, the God of heaven will set up the kingdom. That would be during this period, right? Before it's the mixed. So it seems to me that maybe this is the idea of the Roman Empire, those people trying to bring in all these other nations under them. You see what I'm saying? Like it's like a racial, ethnic mix. That could be part of it too, the kind of empire that they established. That you've got people from Spain all the way to Mesopotamia that are part of the Roman Empire, and they're not all racially the same. There's a lot of mixture and intermingling, and so maybe that could be the image. But regardless, I do think he's pointing to that fourth major empire of Rome, and maybe even during that division period of Rome, this is when the kingdom is growing in a lot of major ways. So,
regardless, though, like he said of what this may be, the main point is during this fourth empire, the Roman Empire, what's going to happen? Another kingdom is going to be set up. Mm-hmm. And this is going to be a kingdom that's going to be unlike any other kingdom. Other kingdoms, other world empires are going to continue to rise and fall. And they still do today. And until this earth is destroyed, they're going to continue to. But this kingdom that's going to be set up during this fourth empire, the Roman Empire, is going to outlast all of these other kingdoms that may rise or fall. And that is the kingdom that is set up by Christ that we see in Acts chapter 2 when Peter preaches the sermon on the day of Pentecost. All of that happened during the Roman Empire. So, with that being said, is any comments or questions up through that? I hope that made sense.
Go back and comment on verse 34.
34. Oh, the stone that was cut out by no human hand. Yeah. Yeah, I think that's helpful. So let me get to that this way. The stone that's made by no human hand crushes these other kingdoms, right? Like that's the picture. How does it crush them? Like, you know the rest of the story. Most of you know the rest of the story. How does this kingdom that's pictured as this stone that is not made by human hand, so it must be made by God's hand, right? How does that kingdom crush the other kingdoms? Yes. It really takes the foundation of their power away in some significant way, right? Like if you lived in the Roman Empire, what were you going to say, Mr. Timmy? Spiritually. That's what I would say. If you lived in the Roman Empire, at one point you would say, my highest devotion has to be to Caesar. But when you're a Christian, all of a sudden I'm devoted to Caesar because I'm devoted to the one who's really king. Right? And that will be true for empires of every sort as long as the kingdom stands, which will be, as Daniel 2:44 says, is forever. One of the reasons I wanted to bring that up in that way is because I think you could read this passage and maybe understand why the Jews of Jesus' day maybe were expecting a military leader. Because what has happened is I think they may very well have been thinking of this in terms of we have been destroyed, but God's going to remake us as His people. And I think you can find that kind of language in the prophets, right? Like He's going to have a new Israel, a new Judah. There's going to be a new covenant, Jeremiah says. You could see all these images, and we're going to crush all those other kingdoms. So when Jesus comes, what do they want to do? They want to make Him the king. It seems like maybe Peter's ready to go to war in the garden and start the kingdom. So all that is to say is I think that the Jews were looking for somebody who was going to come and crush the Roman Empire like a stone was going to crush this image. But that's not the way it actually ends up happening, which is an interesting thing. And we'll just think about that when we look at the fulfillment of these promises, when we look at the kingdom. But like you said, Mr. Timmy, pointing to verse 34, this will be a kingdom cut by no human hand. And I think that probably Jesus is echoing that when He says the kingdom is not of this world. That is, that its origin is not of this world. Our citizenship, Paul would say in Philippians 3, is in heaven. That's where the kingdom's headquarters are. That's where the reign is from, not from some particular city or place. And its origin is heavenly origin. So that gets to what you were trying to highlight. And I think that's helpful as we see sometimes the way that the prophecies are fulfilled maybe is not what we would have expected on first reading. And yet it makes so much more sense when we actually see, because that way the kingdom of God continues to crush nations in the sense that people's real loyalty ought to be to God who made it. All right. Sorry about that.
No, it's good. So to finish this story up, finish chapter 2 up. After this happened, Nebuchadnezzar was greatly impressed. He was impressed with Daniel, and he sees God. Apparently, he sees God working there, and Daniel is going to be promoted. So the empire was divided into provinces, and the main province, I think, was right there around the main city of Babylon. And the way I understand it, that's the one that Nebuchadnezzar put Daniel over and kind of promoted him. And Daniel went back, requested to the king for Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego to be promoted as well. And they are. So kind of what I drew from this, closing out chapter 2, is as these stories continue to occur and Daniel and Shadrach and Meshach and Abednego are continuing to be promoted and God is working through him, then Nebuchadnezzar is getting to see more and more who God is. God is being revealed more and more as we go through here. And that's to kind of close out that chapter. That's interesting because if anybody could boast about there not being a God or God couldn't do anything, didn't have the power to do what he did, it would have been Nebuchadnezzar, because what had Nebuchadnezzar done that no other king had previously done? Yes, he had taken Jerusalem and destroyed God's temple. But God again is showing him, God rules. You might have done that, but I'm more powerful and I rule in the kingdoms of men. Any questions or comments about chapter 2?
Wouldn't that give hope if you're a captive and you're reading what Daniel has written down here, or you've heard reports about it, and that Daniel told the King Nebuchadnezzar that God was still at work in the kingdoms of men? Like, you might be looking around and wondering how you got to where you are, but it would give hope in troubled times, wouldn't it? And I think really, like you just said right there, that seeing God's power over the kingdoms, God ruling over the kingdoms of men, is the key theme, I think, of Daniel, and I think that shows us that. Okay, everybody good through chapter 2? Great job, Mr. Colby. So as we look at chapter 3, we start off with another image, and Alan actually texted me earlier this week and asked if the image in chapter 3 is in any way related to the image in chapter 2. Does Nebuchadnezzar get some kind of idea from the image in chapter 2 to chapter 3? I would say I'm not sure about that. One thing is interesting. The word image that's used here, the word image is used all through the Old Testament, but the one that's used here is used 15 times in the Old Testament, and all of them are in Daniel chapter 2 and 3. Now, part of that is because of the Aramaic writing of some of the book of Daniel instead of Hebrew, but the word here for image is related to the Hebrew word for image. So I say that to say there might be some connection. If there is a connection, I think this is what it would be, is that when Nebuchadnezzar hears that the head is of gold, he says, well, we're just going to make an image all of gold, and maybe he thinks that he can push back on the interpretation of the dream, and that maybe he and his kingdom will last forever. A couple of commentaries that I read did mention that possibility. They weren't for sure about that, but I think it's possible. Now, he does build an image, and we're going to do some summarizing here as well. And how high or big does your text say that the erection is? Yeah, 60 cubits, which a cubit is about 18 inches, a foot and a half. So 90 feet high, and then 9 feet wide. So this would have been a massive image. And so Nebuchadnezzar gathers the satraps. If your translation says satraps, that would be like a governor over a province of the empire. The prefects, which would be an official, the governors, the counselors, the treasurers, the justices, the magistrates, the officials of all the provinces, to come to the dedication of the image that King Nebuchadnezzar has set up. You have those people mentioned again in verse 3. So they come. And then in verse 4, a herald is going to proclaim, when the horn and the pipe and the lyre and the trigon and the harp and the bagpipe and every kind of music, every people, every nation, every language, regardless of where they came from, regardless of the gods that they worship, they are to fall down before the golden image that King Nebuchadnezzar has set up. And so to do this was not only a spiritual thing that they were going to do, or a religious thing, but it would basically show your allegiance or your loyalty, I think, to King Nebuchadnezzar. And that may be the very point of the image itself, is to show the people, all these different nations, their commitment to him. And whoever doesn't do that is going to be cast into a fiery furnace. We see that in verse 6. So when in verse 7 that happens, All the people do this, right? All these representatives do that. But in verse 8, who doesn't do it? Verses 8 and following. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, as we know them by their Hebrew names. And notice this, the Chaldeans came forward and maliciously accused the Jews. It seems to me that there are some hometown fellows, right, who maybe are a little bit bothered by the rising of Daniel. I would be thankful for Daniel because he just saved your life, guys. But also Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. But when they say that you've made the decree that this should happen when all these instrument plays, there are certain Jews, verse 12, who you have appointed over the affairs of the province of Babylon, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. They pay no attention to you. They do not serve your gods or worship the golden image that you have set up. All right? So they are refusing to bow down to the image. Why would they refuse to do that? That's exactly right. God was the one who they were going to worship. This is the Ten Commandments right from the start, right? You shall have no other gods before me. There shall be no graven image that you're going to bow down to. So this is fundamental. This is right at the heart of it for Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. This is a no compromise kind of issue for them, as we're going to see. Any thoughts through verse 12? Mr. Colby?
That's the leading cause of the reason they're in captivity.
That's exactly right. Yes. Idolatry had been a major problem, and you can see that all the way through. And Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego not giving in that. Why is Daniel not mentioned? I don't know. Maybe he was out of town. Maybe he had been sent on some business trip. But I would imagine he would have been right there among them. But maybe he's just not in this particular area. He's not responsible. He's not. Maybe the Chaldeans maybe aren't as mad as at him because he did save their life or something. But he's just not mentioned in this story. So Nebuchadnezzar is angry, calls Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego to come and give an answer. Now, he says, I'm going to give you another chance, basically. This is through verse 15. But if you do not worship, you shall immediately be cast into a burning fiery furnace. And who is the God who will deliver you out of my hands? It seems Nebuchadnezzar has forgotten very quickly about Daniel's power that had been given to him by God. But it's interesting, their answer. We have no need to answer you in this matter. If this be so, our God whom we serve is able to deliver us from the fiery furnace, and he will deliver us out of your hand, O king. But if not, be it known to you, O king, that we will not serve your gods or worship the golden image that you have set up. So basically, these three Hebrews say, you don't have to waste your money hiring the instrument players, because we're not going to bow down the second time either. That's just not going to happen. Because the God we serve is able to deliver us out of a fiery furnace. But I like this part. But even if he does not, we're still not going to bow down. You say, not every righteous person had been delivered from the execution that would come. Not every righteous person would be delivered from whatever persecution or execution would come. So Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego have full confidence that God is able, and I think they believe he will deliver them out of this, but they are not so dependent on their physical preservation that they say, and that's the only reason we serve him. They say, even if he does not preserve our lives, even if we're burned up and consumed in the fire, we're still not going to be the ones who bow down to your golden image. And I like the power of that, because that would speak to captives in Judah, in Babylon from Judah, who would say, do we know that God's going to keep us from being executed every time? I don't know that you can always count on that. I know we can't now, right? And so, we could still have a Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego attitude.
And not bowing down the first time would have been hard enough.
Oh, yes.
But the second time would have been even harder, I think, because now they're talking to Nebuchadnezzar face to face.
That's right.
And to have the boldness to be able to stand face to face with him and tell him this, that's faith.
Right. So Nebuchadnezzar doesn't go through the process. He gets the fire heated. It's so hot, it kills the men who are throwing them into the fire. Now, this is interesting. In verse 24, Nebuchadnezzar, these three men, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, fell down in the burning fire furnace. Verse 24, then King Nebuchadnezzar was astonished and rose up in haste. He declared to his counselors, did we not throw 3 bound men into the fire? They answered and said to the king, True, O king. He answered and said, But I see 4 men unbound, walking in the midst of the fire, and they are not hurt, and the appearance of the fourth is like the son of the gods. Now, I don't know who this fourth image is. I think that it would be perfectly right to understand this as an angel. We see angels sent to take care of and provide for God's people on several occasions. There have been some who have suggested that maybe this is a pre-incarnate appearance of Jesus, that here is Jesus appearing with Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in the flames before He comes in His bodily form, as He will, as Jesus of Nazareth. That's very possible. I think the ultimate point of this is that God's presence is with them in some way. So whether this is an angel, whether this is in a pre-incarnate picture of Jesus, I think the idea here is that we threw 3 men there, but there's more than 3 men in there because God is with them. Now, in what way is that being carried out? I don't know what the identity of this person is. I know he appears like one of the gods. So maybe Nebuchadnezzar is right about that when he thinks about, and we would think about seeing Jesus. But what we know for sure is that God is with His people in the furnace. So Nebuchadnezzar calls them out. They don't even smell like smoke, verse 27. The smell of fire had not come upon them. And Nebuchadnezzar said, Blessed be the God, speaking well of, high praise. Blessed be the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who has sent His angel and delivered His servants who trusted in Him and set aside the king's command and yielded up their bodies rather than serve and worship any God except their own God. For the king of Babylon to say, your God is blessed because you have trusted in Him and you set aside my command. That was a humbling experience for Nebuchadnezzar to see that. So, verse 29, I make a decree, any people, nation, or language that speaks anything against the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego shall be torn limb from limb, and their houses laid in ruin. Doesn't that remind you of chapter 2 with what He was going to do for the people who couldn't interpret His dream, couldn't tell Him what the dream was? Now, He's flipping that and saying, if you speak against the God of the Hebrews, then the king promoted Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in the province of Babylon. And I bet the Chaldeans who told on them were even more upset now than they were when they told on them in the first place. All right, God rules in the kingdoms of men. And He gave the captives into the hand of Nebuchadnezzar, but He gave them grace in the face of their captivity. Anything else? Sunday night, I believe the schedule says Ephesians 1, not Ephesians. I wish it said Ephesians. But it says Ezekiel, not Ecclesiastes, Ezekiel 1 through 7. There's not 7 chapters of Ephesians anyway. Ezekiel 1 through 7, and that's what we're going to try to cover on Sunday night, Lord willing.
Thanks for watching. If you found this video to be beneficial, please follow us on Facebook or subscribe to our YouTube channel. Feel free to share it with others that you feel like may benefit from it. If you need to contact us, please contact us via email at quinn.church@yahoo.com. Also, if you're in the area, we would love for you to come visit with us at one of our assemblies. Have a good day.